here with us tonight, Chris Bloch, as you know. By way of introduction, well, do you want to tell yourself, give them your bio, or do you want me to?
I was born in Crystal, Minnesota.
Give them some shows they might have seen you around town.
I've been in the DC area for about 11, 12 years now. I came out to be with this lovely woman in the back, my wife Wendy. And we had met on tour. We met doing the Buddy Holly story. And for the first year or so that I was in town, I would go in and out of town doing a couple of shows here and then go off to do some little bit of regional theater that I had made some connections with around the country. But since about '03, I've been here steadily, just doing work in town, except for one foray for unfortunate, dreadful production of Christmas Carol down at Virginia Stage. But it was with a very dear friend, so we had a fun time at least doing it together. But I worked a number of times at Signtature Theater, probably closing in on 10, something like that, wow. I guess. Started off with 20th Century, and funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, in the garage, when they were still there. Did Urinetown there as well. Yeah, it was a fun one. It was a blast. Some of the stuff here, chess, I love doing. It was the last show I did here about a year and a half or so ago. One of my favorites, just because it had so many of my loves together. I love music, I love theater, and I love chess. So I was in my addiction heaven right there. And of course this one, and also Merrily We Roll Along. I think I'm forgetting one.
Right?
Les Mis, right?
That's a big one.
Right, and there was a big one.
Kiss the Spider Woman, right?
Kiss the Spider Woman was the other one I was
yeah.
remember too. I think that's pretty much it.
And then around town you've been at Ford's?
A lot of stuff at Ford's. Probably Ford's and Signtature have been the places I've worked most. I've done a bunch of stuff there, and also a number of things up at Everyman. I've worked at Shakespeare before. I'll actually be going back there again after I'm finished with this show. And also Roundhouse, Olney, and a bunch of stuff up at Everyman in Baltimore. Done a number of things up there too, which I'll also be going back to in February. Looking forward to doing a production that they did here, God of Carnage.
Which part are you playing?
I'll be doing Michael.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. That
Which one is Michael?
Michael is the one whose apartment they're visiting, who's
the one
upset.
that play.
Yeah, yeah. He's not the lawyer who has the phone ringing all the time. He's the one who works with the appliance parts life cycle.
Yeah. And you've done a little bit of film and television, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Your bio said that you were in the last episode of The West Wing.
Yeah, it was a kind of fun little bit of synchronicity. An agency that I worked with a little bit in Baltimore called me in, and they needed kind of a tourist-like character from Minnesota was the backstory, though you wouldn't know it from. So, of course, I fit that bill, originally being from Minnesota. Ended up doing Allison Janney's last scene with her, just outside the White House. And I've always wanted to try and do this. When she was doing 9 to 5 up in New York on Broadway, this was a couple of years after we had shot the scene. You know, when we were talking during, before the setups and everything was taken care of, you know, there was a little girl who was in the scene with us. And, you know, she was talking to us and saying, I'll never forget you guys. This is my last scene of this series. It's meant so much to me. And she was very emotional, you know, understandably. And it was a real honor to share that last moment of that show with her. And she said, I'll never forget you guys. And I wanted so badly to go up to New York and just stand at the stage door and say, Allison Janney, do you remember me? But I never quite got the chance. There were some friends in the show with her as well, but it would have been fun to share that with her. And a little bit, also some independent film work, both here and in Minnesota. I used to do a lot of commercial work in Minneapolis and industrial film work. And a lot of voice work back there as well.
Now your bio listed some audio stuff for Star Wars?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
What is that all about?
The first year they started to put, and it was back then it was on tape, not CDs or DVDs. They started producing it out in Los Angeles the first season, and they were not happy with the product, and there were huge cost overruns because they ended up using a lot of stars in the roles, and the production company was not happy with the product, and they ended up sending it out to Minnesota, where there was a very good audio producer. He has his own studio, and he ended up using actually the MPR, Minnesota Public Radio Studios, and all the people who did voice work in town worked on these scripts, and they ended up doing several years worth out there. And we just had a blast, because normally we're doing, you know, a 30-second spot in a booth together, you know, with the microphones on, and then they edit it right there. But with this one, you got to do a little bit of acting with it. There was a little bit of interaction with voices, and one of the guys who's on, well, both Tim Russell and Sue Scott were both on Prairie Home Companion, were involved with that as well, and still do a fair amount of voice work in Minneapolis as well. But it was kind of everybody who did voice work to some extent in Minneapolis were doing those. It was a blast. It was a blast, yeah. Phasers set on stun were put in afterwards. All the fireworks and war scenes and all the sound effects were added afterwards. You just had to imagine what was happening at that particular time and kind of raise your voice to the level that it was needed, you know, level of anxiety. And then they'd add all the special effects later. But they were a blast to be with.
Now, do you do any voiceover work here in DC?
Very little. I've only done one or two since I've been here.
Okay.
After the SAG strike, it was about 10 years or so ago, where it was long and protracted. I don't know if you were aware of it at the time, but it really changed a lot of the dynamics of both the on-camera and the off-camera work that was available in the regions. And a lot of stuff has gone non-union since then. What used to be mainly union work, SAG, AFTRA, and Actors Equity are the actors' unions. And after that happened, a lot of that work just disappeared and only stays in the bigger markets of New York and Los Angeles at this point.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's jump a little bit further back. So from Minnesota, was acting always the goal?
It was. When I came out of high school, I discovered it my final year in high school.
How did you discover it?
I had done a very early piece with my father when I was probably 5 or 6, was the first time I was ever on stage.
Okay.
So maybe the bug bit me there, but it didn't really follow through until I ended up doing a show in high school. I think Romeo and Juliet may have been the first one, and then I ended up doing The Miser, and I did the lead role in high school, Harbigon. And it was kind of eye-awakening for me in terms of learning how to build a character. You know, it was, you know, ground zero.
Yeah.
But I had a blast doing it. And, you know, I got to wear a silly wig and a long beard and be a cranky old stingy fellow. And something bit me then. And, you know, and before that I'd been, I guess, a little bit of a jock. I was involved with tennis competitively. I had been a little bit involved with basketball competitively and a little bit of football here and there, just little seasons here and there. But this caught me, and I was deciding, because I had been involved with music already, and I was already trying to consider whether or not I was going to study music after leaving high school, or will I get involved with theater? And I decided not to take the college route with it, and just started getting involved with it on the community level, finding whatever jobs I could. I was working in a warehouse for a while.
Okay.
And working restaurant jobs for a little while, and just started working up my ranks. And I was using my music background as well to do a fair amount of composing in the Minneapolis area for theater. Most of it was environmental music, stuff that would happen in between or during scenes, depending what they needed. And back then, it was a lot more live stuff than tape stuff. A lot of times it was a live, small orchestra or band, you know, maybe 2, 3 instruments. And frequently I would do kind of jack of all trades in a show where I would either be a music director, although as time went on I wasn't a good enough piano player to continue being it when the piano player and the music director became one position instead of two. And I would compose music for shows sometimes. I did a score for the Mandragola, which is an old Machiavellian piece, a period piece back from Renaissance. And composed a score for that, and was in it, played some instruments in it as well, and taught the rest of, the cast, the music, as well as playing a role. And gradually I moved away from composing and started to focus entirely on performing as well. But there's always been kind of part of me that wanted to get back into it. But I really have to catch up on a lot of technology in order to do that.
So you skipped the college route, like you said. Were there any classes, or was it all just learning on the job for you then?
It was pretty much all learning on the job for me.
Okay, was that rough, or did the career just kind of work out for you?
No, it was pretty steady. I graduated from high school in '73. In '81, about 8 years later, 26, I guess, is when I became equity.
Oh wow. Okay.
Even a couple of years before that, because I started doing a little bit more commercial work, and I joined after before I actually joined equity. Since I joined, after an equity, I haven't done anything else but act.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's been great,
Yeah.
And particularly in Minnesota, there was it's a terrific community back there. One that I miss in terms of the old friendships that I had. I see glimpses of that here, with people who have been here for 20, 30 years, and remember, oh my God, do you remember when we were kids and we did this show together? And I was starting to have those friends here, since I've worked with about 10 years or so. But it's been wonderful to have that focus for that long a time on just doing acting, whether it's in film, TV, or this, theater obviously is what I do most of, especially since being here, but I adore it, and I love the fact that I've been able to do what I love all my life.
That's great. Any questions so far? Yes, Barbara.
Okay, how did you learn all these musical instruments and,
that's a great question.
stuff? You didn't go to college, big deal, I didn't either, but, it's like, that's hard. And you piano and,
I started off with flute when I was a kid. My parents knew that I was kind of bored in school, so they just said, let's have him do an instrument, and I picked up flute. At that point, I had braces, so saxophone and trumpet did not work. It would have been too painful. So I ended up taking flute and got a fair amount of grief for it as well. But that's what I learned music on. There was generally a piano around the house. I think I took piano lessons for a month when I was a kid, and we moved, and I never took them up again, but my brother took them a little bit longer, and there was always a keyboard around. So I was always around a piano, so I played it. And, when I sight read, it's not off your traditional scale and all the notes. I generally read off a chart where, which I learned chords from playing guitar. And that was pretty much self-taught. I got out of band and just started learning guitar when I was in junior high school. I've been playing it ever since. And you just, you play something for a long time and you just pick up on it. And for other shows, I've picked up on other instruments and, playing a harmonica for, Shenandoah or a mandolin for, I think, or a lute also for Christmas Carol, I think. Once you learn one string instrument, it's a lot easier to use another one, because I think I remember playing banjo for one as well. Once you're in a family of instruments, it's a lot easier to learn just the instrument instead of learning the music. And whether it's a facility that I have that makes it easier for me, I don't know. But I love that aspect of it. What I love about theater is learning a part of a craft and layering it on top of whatever you're doing, whether it's an instrument for a show or something you're learning about an epoch in history, for a character, learning a background. That's what I love about theater, constantly shifting focuses on it.
That's great. Yes, Judith, and then over here.
You mentioned that your first time on stage was with your father when you were 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Was he a
You remember
professional?
that song, Amazing Little Toy, it went bop when it stopped,
Yeah.
when it stood still, yeah, that was the song.
Was he a professional actor? Was he doing community
No, but he was
theater?
involved. It's a very interesting story. He came over with his mother from Germany at the beginning of the war. He was only about 13 when he first came over. He went back as an American soldier. At the end of the war, was on hand at Buchenwald when they liberated it. And he was in a prisoner of war camp where he was an interrogator / interpreter. And one of my most cherished possessions was a chess set that was carved for him by one of the prisoners, which I still have. And obviously with my love of chess, it's very dear to me. He's passed on, in the early 90s. But when he came to New York, he dabbled in various portions of art, painting. He was a tech director for theater. He did some set designing. He worked up in Summerstock, up in the Catskills in northern New York. Worked with a lot of up-and-comers, who were doing Summerstock at that time. Some of the names, B. Arthur, Lee Remick, Jack Guilford, all these names that were, just beginning actors at that point. They were doing the same thing, anybody does, is starting off in the Summerstock and working their way up and going into the bigger markets, But he was very involved with that. He did a little bit of directing here and there. He was a self-professed awful actor. Did not do much of that. I think maybe the only time that I saw him on stage is when I was performing with him when I was 5. My mom did a fair amount of community theater when I was growing up, so there was that influence on me as well. She worked at a stock company just down the road from where I grew up called the Old Log Theater. It's about the oldest running theater west of the Mississippi, I believe. It's been around for probably close to 60 years now. Yeah, but I grew up on that as well. So there was always a little bit of influence from both my parents, and found out much after the fact, after I'd really made my choice as a career, that my father's father, before he died before my dad was born, had been a touring working actor in Germany.
Wow.
Yeah, so maybe it was in my blood.
So I'm assuming the family was supportive then of the decision to go into acting?
You crazy? Don't go into that. No, they were. They really were. Yeah. It was in their blood to some degree as well. My mom, after she moved down to Arizona, where she still lives, still did a little bit of community theater down there as well. But since then, we're making way too much noise. But they enjoyed it, and coming to see stuff, and we're very supportive of it as well.
Excellent. You had a question?
Yeah, I knew a guy in LA many years ago who did go to college to learn to be an actor, and his agent said, now you've got to learn how to talk like a regular person.
Yeah.
And he ended up a couple of years of being a cab driver and things where he just learned to speak like a normal person.
Yeah.
Again, so I'm wondering if you think maybe it was
Where would you like to go?
Exactly. And I'm wondering if you think maybe it was an actual advantage to not have to overcome that kind of training.
I think the only advantage was that I didn't have to pay off student loans. That's the main
Not to be
thing.
underestimated.
But, the only thing that I was really concerned with in taking a college set of courses with a certain school and staying with it for 4 years is, what if you didn't like the professors? What if you didn't like the program that was offered there? You try and make sure before you go in, and a little bit of the reputation of the place. But my worries were about what I'd like to do is just sink in, work with a broad spectrum of different people, approach each show kind of as a classroom situation, and really just learn by doing. A lot of times I think when kids come out of college and are ready to hit the streets, the only thing that they may have a good background in terms of their understanding of the body of work and maybe how to approach it, but it may be a certain approach. One thing that I think helped me with getting involved with it by on-the-job training is I feel very adaptable to any way of working. I don't feel like I have to follow my one particular routine of getting into a character. Okay, I highlight the words that I want to hit, hit this and do this, and okay, how do I focus on this period of time, and where did I come from? It's just a natural capturing of different facts and things that you want to gather, and I think it can come from any different perspectives, and I think that's one of the best things that happened to me in terms of learning it on the job.
I know the method guys used to drive Alfred Hitchcock. You're a guy that every director would love.
Hopefully.
It seems like listening to you talk about the instruments and the composition and the act that you're probably, it seems like your whole life you've been a fairly self-taught person, right?
Fairly, yeah.
Okay, so then maybe the college system probably wasn't necessary for some.
Yeah, because a lot of times it's the structure
Right.
that help people go forward and learn, and they go off from that structure and find out the spots, but that they're really drawn to. But
Right.
whenever I'm drawn to something, it takes me into it, and I love digging into that stuff.
Right.
It happened with chess as well. When I was learning that and just going into tournaments and just digging in and seeing where it led. Still, some of my most nervous moments have come across a chessboard, not on stage.
Interesting.
Yeah. And when you're waiting for that one move that you think, okay, I think this could decide the game. Have my thoughts been true? Have I considered everything that I need to consider, or does he see something that I don't? Just waiting for it. And it all always comes out. Some of the tics that you see in chess tournaments are amazing. There's great character studies. Great character studies. Yeah.
So you finished high school, you decided you want to be an actor.
Yeah.
Did you just jump right into the business, or were there day jobs you had to take on?
No, I stayed with day jobs for a while. Okay. I was a Teamster for about a year and a half. Solidarity. Still on honorable withdrawal. I still have my card somewhere.
I just found Jimmy Hoffa yet.
Yeah, they just found him in Michigan.
Is he there?
Yeah, I don't know, but I just heard the story that they dug up yet another tool shed. Yeah, I did that for a while. I did some waitering jobs. It was actually a fun waitering job. It was a place called Daddy's Restaurant, where all the waiters and waitresses sang and performed intermittently whenever they had time, and it was a very festive atmosphere, and for a restaurant job it was a great one to have. I've made a great bunch of friends from that restaurant, and I got out of it before it started becoming too stressful, or before I started hating it, and gradually, and I was selling Time Life books for a while.
Okay.
And that was a really part-time job where it kind of helped me when I was making the transition into theater full-time, when I was still non-union, but still doing commercial work as well through AFTRA in Minneapolis. And then a couple of years of that, and then I turned equity in '81.
Okay.
My first show was Sound of Music.
Okay.
Actually, I did the last month. I was hired for Sound of Music first, but they were doing Annie Get Your Gun, and there was a fellow named Guy Paul who was doing the lead, Frank Butler, in that. He had come back. He had been in Minneapolis and had gone off to New York and had come back to do this lead. And jump forward about 25, 30 years or so, and he was in the production of John Doe that I did at Ford's.
Oh.
And so we reconnected, and I said, I really should retire now. Do my first and last show with you. But it was fun to work with him again.
So first show then, and being the self-taught learner that you are, what were you learning? If you can think back that far, what was was the experience like that?
Try
first
to
show?
remember to put the correct costume on at the right time.
Okay, so,
I have a very vivid memory of, because I had a very fast change, and I was going on, and I believe I was playing Native American at the time, you know,
Okay.
at one point. And I was racing across and came across, and the crew member kind of quietly said to me, "You're in the wrong costume." What? You're in the wrong costume. I just had to skip the scene because it would make no sense to have me in there. But there, more than anything, you know, I had done a bunch of shows and had been involved with equity shows as a non-equity member. So it didn't feel like a big change or adjustment to me. It was fun in terms of starting that journey, and it felt pretty cool joining equity.
Okay.
So whenever, you know, a younger member of any cast is joining equity, you know, I'm all there saying congrats. I know what it felt like for me, you know, and if they wanted to make that jump and kind of commit to a career in it, which I think you kind of have to do if you're going to do theater professionally. You know, it's possible not to, but I think if you're going to make the jump, it opens up a lot of avenues for you. It's a pretty exciting step.
Yeah, and so jumping now ahead a couple of years, you ended up in DC. So your first show at Signtature was 20th Century?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Do you remember?
I came in for cold auditions. It was when I was first coming here. I first came here in 2001.
Okay.
I came here and dropped off a truckload of stuff at the house where we're living at right now.
Okay.
And then I immediately went back to Minneapolis to do a show because it came up very quickly. I knew something wasn't coming up, so I went back. And I had already set up an audition for the general auditions. They're basically cattle calls, the Washington area League of Theater Auditions, I think, something like that. Yeah.
They kind of don't really exist anymore. But
No, they don't. Okay.
yeah, well, in the league, yeah, Theater Washington's kind of taking their place. I guess,
No,
slowly.
okay.
Yeah.
But back in '01, I figured I might as well just get my face out there, put it out, and due to pearls of wisdom from my better half, I did a Steve Martin monologue.
With
The one where
banjo.
it's from the jerk where he's laying in bed with his girlfriend. She's fast asleep, and he says, "Okay, I want to tell you something. It's a secret." And she's fast asleep, so it's just talking to somebody who doesn't hear anything he's saying. And it's a very funny thing about how long they've been together. And I laid down on the stage and did it, and it killed. It killed. It was great. Everybody was laughing. It had a fun time. You know, there had been the Sturm und Drang just before me, so a little bit of levity came in very handy at that point.
Who directed that?
Oh no, this was just a monologue that
yeah.
I did for
the
league auditions.
Okay,
Yeah.
the leagues, that's right, so everyone was there, okay.
So I just came back for that day. They let me off of rehearsals for Jacques Brel in Minneapolis, and I was able to fly back, come do it. You know, it was all worked out in the contract, so it worked out fine. And I figured, I started getting all these, you know, phone calls on my cell, and Wendy was taking someone home and said, "Okay, can we bring you in to read for something?" I said, "I can't. I'm in Minneapolis at the time." I said, "Oh, that's great. Just give us a call when we get back." So after I got back a couple months later, I was forgotten. It didn't make any difference. You know, it was, the moment had passed. It was no longer. So I just started from ground zero again with the next set of auditions. But the cold auditions for 20th Century were basically ones that they had, their annual auditions
Okay.
for Signtature.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I think it was the first show in their season that year, yeah.
Who directed the show, do you remember?
It was Eric, wasn't
Was
it?
it Eric?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it was Eric.
Okay.
Oh God, I know Ken was there all the time, changing things,
Right.
you know,
Ken
but,
Ludwig.
yeah. But yeah, it was Eric, yeah,
Okay.
it was.
Okay. How was that experience?
It was fun, it was a blast. Holly Twyford and Jimmy, oh God, what's James' last name? He was terrific. He came down from New York to do it. It was a madcap piece, and more than anything, discovering how different playwrights work in terms of rewrites is always amazing to me. Some will write for the rhythm of something, which I think Ken does a lot of times in his rewrites. Some will dig into something in terms of character, but Ken was very much a rhythmic person in terms of, okay, we need a da-da-da-da-da-da-da, boom, boom. You know, it was almost like, this is what sets up the rim shot machine. And it was fascinating to see how he wrote those things out. And it went through quite a number of changes. And I think it was Jim Kronzer who did the set, this wonderful rolling railroad car. It was just great. It was terrific. It was fun. And it was my first, not my very first initiation, it was my first time at Signtature, meeting a lot of those people, but getting to know some of the folks I would work with a lot more.
That's great. That's great. And now you're here doing Whorehouse.
Yeah.
How's that going?
It's been great. You're talking about some of the houses loving it, and it has been one of the steadiest reactions to a show that I've been aware of. You know, a lot of times you get quiet houses, you know, it's, you know, part of the magic of theater that it changes every night and it's always going to modify. But the reactions have been quite steady with this piece, and I think it's just, it is light and fluffy, but I think Eric has dug in to a lot of the heart of it as well and brought some of that out. So it lays in that netherworld where there's a little bit of compassion for the characters as well. It's not just, you know,
it's not a farce.
Idiocy,
Right.
Yeah.
And let's just assume that there might be somebody here, one or two people who actually haven't seen it yet. Okay, so sum it up. What is the story here?
It is based on an actual historical event. There was a place called the Chicken Ranch in Texas, in LaGrange, Texas. If you know the old.
Who did the song?
Oh my God! Who did? ZZ Top. Thank you. An old rock and roll tune. I never knew it was about the Chicken Ranch, but it is about that place. And a news reporter who was kind of one of these personalities down in Houston, his name was Melvin Thorpe, found out about it, and he was kind of one of these personalities that loved going after stories that would make an impact, whether it was local or national, whatever. But it was generally human interest stories around the area, and he found out about this and made it a campaign to close it down. And it turned into this big cause because he kept hammering away at it. And eventually, you know, it got to a position where, you know, the government couldn't ignore it. It got politically involved as well, and the community had to say, okay, we can't do this anymore. And although it was one of those institutions, you know, you think about, you know, a whorehouse and what goes on. You know, prostitution isn't something that we take very lightly these days. And a lot of times in the city, it can be brutal for women. But with this institution that had been there for 125 years, kind of underneath the radar, and all of a sudden to be closed, it's presented in this musical with much more levity and a lot more warmth than the institution obviously generally is, you know, in use these days.
Okay. And you play this
and I play Melvin Thorpe, who is a send-up of Melvin Thorpe, and I think it gives me a lot of latitude and a lot of freedom. If he had been named Melvin Thorpe in the show, I think I would have had to treat the character with a little bit more respect, which I really don't have much of it in the show.
Have you watched any of Ziller's stuff?
I did. I watched some of it, because there's still some stuff of him on YouTube, and some of his network news, or I can't remember. It was a tagline kind of like that.
Did you use anything that you saw there, or are you totally separate from the reality?
Not totally. I think some stuff probably sunk in. It's more of that personality and the vocal drive of it more than anything. Although it's not quite like him, it has some of that life to it, and the drive of a newsman and a news reporter who's on a mission. Okay, this is what we're going to do.
Right.
There's a guy who there's a fellow who's been around ages. I can't remember. He's a much more slower paced news reporter.
Okay.
Do you know who I'm talking about?
He's
He's on local news, And he does these human interest stories, and he kind of talks like this, and, you know, he's kind of the opposite of who Marvin Zindler was.
Right.
But it makes me think of this particular guy as a very distinguished method of delivering the news report. But I think it definitely lives in Melvin Thorpe to some degree as well.
Interesting. Any questions? Judith?
Not a question, just a comment. I think what's particularly fun about you in this show is that more so than anybody else in the cast, you play with the audience all the time.
Yeah.
It's like,
The fourth wall is going on. You guys are the studio audience in that first scene in my show, and then you're the crowd in the street scene. And obviously with the governor scene in Act 2, you know, when we're doing Sidestep, we're presenting it to a lot of people who might be watching the governor at this, you know, maybe you're the news reporters. So all the scenes I'm involved with, the fourth wall can be gone for me, which is great. And I've always felt fairly comfortable with that. I did a show a long time ago called Billy Bishop Goes to War. It's a one-man show that I've had the joy of doing twice, about 6-7 years apart. And it was where I learned fairly early on in my career, because it was probably the first 3 or 4 years I was doing equity work, how to get myself out of trouble, how to know the confidence of holding on to an audience and how to reach out. And during that show, I could break the fourth wall, because a lot of times I was dealing directly with the audience and could look at people. I just wasn't looking out beyond them. I could deal with them because I was telling the story of this Canadian World War I flying ace who was an actual character, an actual guy in history. And it was one of those moments where, you know, describing that moment where he realizes that he's killed somebody in an aerial combat, and seeing the plane fall down and seeing the pilot still in it, and hanging on to that moment with the audience and feeling it with the audience at that time was an amazing moment when you feel an audience with you telling the story and feel them. It's just, it's all one when that magic happens. It's glorious when it happens on stage.
And you can feel it. You can,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily the noise of the audience. You can tell a good quiet audience from a
Yeah.
bad quiet audience.
Oh, you can
just feel
tell when that focus is there, and you can tell when they're whether it's because of us or because they've just been up too late the night before. You never know, you know.
Sometimes you just can't.
But you can tell, yeah.
Definitely.
One of the matinees where I got finished with one of my more reliable laugh lines, and you know, there was a long pause, and I'm just kind of waiting for them and waiting, and then the laugh comes because they're waiting for something to happen, so they fill it, and it's kind of an old actor trick, but. Okay, I'll wait for you. You know? and that's what generally happens. And it was fun to play with that day. But you know, as I was waiting for him, I was kind of scanning the audience, and you know, about a third of the audience was sitting like this. You know, which is a very telltale thing. You know, a lot of times when you know there's a lot of arms and legs crossed, you know, and say, okay, show me something. You know, maybe it's some people who want to be watching a ball game someplace else. Okay, I got dragged to theater instead. You know what happens.
It could also been cold.
Yeah. Oh, and I do remember doing a show one time. This was back in Minneapolis, and the Twins were in the World Series, and there were a lot of radios with your in the audience. You can see them.
Oh, I love it. Were you familiar with the Whorehouse at all before you did the show?
No, I had not done it before.
Okay. What do you like about the show now that you've done it? I spent some time with it.
I like doing Melvin.
Yeah.
It's a fun character because it's pretty outrageous, and I can go very far with it.
Yes.
And, you know, I just got finished doing Ben Franklin, and obviously it's a little bit more low-key, thoughtful man. So it's fun to make that jump to somebody who's just, it was kind of an interesting little jump. I had just gotten back. This was because of Eric,
Okay.
I don't know if this was one of the things on your list or not, but
No, you're fine.
I had done the Lunt Fontaine Fellowship
yes, I was gonna
out
talk
in
about that.
Wisconsin. 10 actors are chosen. This has been happening for about 4 years or so.
A few months ago, Naomi Jacobson was a guest and she talked about it. She was a fellow a few years ago as well, for those of you who may remember that, but you might want to review.
Yeah,
So,
10 Chimneys is the place where Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontaine lived, and they would go back to this place just outside of Milwaukee. It's this beautiful little retreat where they would go every summer and just build more of this little estate that they had and modify it. And friends would come out. Most noticeably, Noel Coward was a very dear friend of them. He came out all the time. Laurence Olivier, Helen Hayes came out all the time. You know, they have their own little named bedrooms in the main house. Anyway, this 1 week retreat is basically what they call it is. This is, bless you, this is for mentoring the mentors. Basically taking a group of 10 actors from around the country that they think are at the top of their field and have been doing it for a while, 20 or 30 years, and giving them a place to just kind of retreat a little bit, to rest, and deal with a master teacher and approach something and be able to exchange ideas in a very safe setting, which is what Lunt and Fontaine both had in mind for 10 Chimneys from the start. It was a place for people to retreat and relax and bring their friends out there. And, you know, it was generally more for than a weekend. You know, they had Claggett Wilson, who was a set designer that they had worked with any number of times. He said, why don't you come out for, a couple of weeks? You could do some painting and some of the, design some things for us that we want done in the house. He ended up staying there for 3 years and painted and did these murals all over the house. It's amazing. And you see Alfred Lunt as these little cherubs all over the wall. But it was a wonderful retreat into this week with, my fellow actors. One of them, you probably know, Brad Oscar, who's done a bunch of stuff and is from the area as well. Ife Butler has done a number of things at Arena. I'm trying to think of anybody else that you might know.
Brad Oscar was the only one who I knew off the list.
Yeah, but it was an immediate bonding, and it was a terrific way to get to know people.
Who were your mentors this year?
Joel Gray was the teacher, and Rob Fisher was the music director. And he's a very well-known music director in New York. I think he's probably known as music director to the stars because he has a very adaptable personality and knows how to dig into each individual and find out what helps them. He doesn't have a way of doing it. He can adapt to a way of helping each individual, because a lot of times with star performers, with the star performer, a lot of times there's an ego that's involved, that is set in their way of how they need to go about it and dig in. And he's very good at adapting to finding the way of helping them learn it as well, which is, part of the process. That's what a director does, in every situation too, of adjusting to the people that he has. But it was a wonderful week, and digging in and finding out what made each of us tick. And then it's kind of a roundabout way of coming back and getting into Melvin. And I thought, okay, all this depth that I've been trying to deal with this last week, I got to throw away. Melvin is two-dimensional, that's it. I don't want to know any more about this guy. I just want to dig in and, and be a little bit idiotic. And for me, it works. I don't know, but it was interesting to come to that kind of thought pattern of leaving that week behind.
What are some of the things you worked on or learned while you were there with Mr. Gray?
It was interesting because I think, without telling too many tales out of school, I think what the week ended up pointing towards was, we got there on a Sunday. On Friday, Joel was going to have a question and answer and a little presentation before an audience of about 250. There's a presentation place where they do this. And then the next day, Saturday, we were going to present what we had worked on, for the week, learning pieces that either we wanted to work on, wanted to investigate maybe characters that we normally would not investigate just because of typing in shows and what you would normally do and normally would not do. And I think Joel was thinking maybe, okay, we have to have a show by the end of the week, and nobody else was thinking that, including 10 Chimneys, including Rob Fisher. So we had an adjustment in terms of, okay, let's show some of this stuff in rehearsal during the presentation to get the audience a chance to see how these people work. You know, all of it is with the material in front of us. Obviously, we're not going to learn it and be memorizing it. And it turned back and forth a little bit from just becoming rote learning, because there's something they discovered that year, since this was the first time they'd done musical theater focus. They'd done a couple on Shakespeare, and they'd done one on Chekhov before. And with strict text, if you know the text to any degree beforehand, you can dig in to the characters. With a musical number, you have to learn the notes. You can't just dig in. You have to be comfortable with the notes and know them well enough to be able to get to the emotion of the song before that happens. So there was that kind of inhibiting wall that was there that was maybe not there for some of the other performers in previous years. But I think what happened also was, with the amount of music that was on the estate, all the volunteers that worked there were joyous about it, because it really brought the place to life. You know, it wasn't a lot of quiet thinking. Okay, what do you think she thinks here? You know, what do you think Shakespeare is trying to say in this moment? And what is the parse of this line? It wasn't, you know, we were working on music. There was one point before I got there, I only had one thing that I wanted to get out. I wanted to play the Noble Cower piano that is in the estate there. And I was able to sit down, because it's the only time that they really let the house open and you can play the piano. It's the only time they fill the pool, is when the fellows are there during that week. And they keep it filled for the volunteer party the following week, but it's the only time the pool is filled. And it's the only time they serve a meal in their dining room, is when the fellows sit around and eat at it. And it was glorious. We had this amazing tour by Christine Wire-Martel, who is one of the vice presidents there, and she was also one of the top docents. She gave an amazing tour of the entire estate. And we'd all been traveling that day. We arrived there on a Sunday. And then we do about a 2-hour tour, and we are hungry by the time, and it's all planned out so that it all wound around the estate. The grounds went into the main house, and then ended right in front of the dining room doors that are closed, and you can smell the aroma coming up, because the kitchen is right next to it. As you said, you know, as Alfred Lund and Lynn Fontanne would have welcomed friends, and there's this glorious table right in front of us, ready to be dined at and shared conversation at. It was a remarkable moment for all of us, a very dear moment.
What picture pieces did you choose to work on?
I did one that was a piece that was written for me. It was, coincidentally, it was, because I just talked about this show, it was a musical based on The Miser, called The Skinflint, which was workshopped up in Minneapolis. And then 2 of us went down to do it at St. Louis Rep, and the rest of the cast came from New York. And Hiram Titus was the composer for that show. Coincidentally, growing up, he was a neighbor of Charles Schultz in Minneapolis, and he's the one that Schroeder is based on. An amazing piano player. I heard him compose a song, not mine. Mine was composed in about 15 minutes when we're working on this piece. But I saw him compose a song in about, or at least outline it in about 5 minutes. You know, just on the moment, okay, this is what I think it should be. Just an amazing facility with piano. Anyway, he had written this song for me, with me in mind, knowing what my parameters were, what I was as character, what I was bringing to the character. And as the character man, Nate Philbert is what I played in the show, and I was kind of the assistant to the miser. It was set in a Brooklyn pawn shop, and he had all of his money hidden in a crocodile that was hiding above the stage. And myself and another woman in it, played by Anna Harada, she did Bolivia. And we were kind of the secondary love interest, both character actors. And it's at one point when I've just been irritated by her, and then I realized that I'm also falling in love with her. So I have this diatribe about understanding all the psychology I've learned, and socialism, and all of this, all the different facets I've gone to school for, and then love's a funny business. It just breaks into another portion of the song, and it's very infrequently that the character man gets to sing a love song. And it was a wonderful split song, a dichotomy of angst and realization of what he's going through at that particular moment. And that's the one that I just, because I knew it well, it's lived with me for quite a while, and I just wanted to revisit it again.
That's great.
And that's what I presented the very first day when we all came in with one song to introduce ourselves to the group at 10 Chimneys. And then we all kind of talked about what got us into it, and that was a very magical day for all of us introducing it, because we were just laying it out there, and it was glorious.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
A wonderful introduction to the entire group. And, of course, Joel had to start off, he started singing, Rico. Rob just sat down, they knew what they were going to say. It was, and he talked about himself, getting into the biz too, and, talked about as a very young man. And if you want, it's a remarkable little bit of YouTube that's on there. You can find Joel Grey making his first appearance on network television on, oh my God, I'm forgetting the old vaudeville performer. Man, oh man, but it's back in the 30s, I think, or something like that. Oh, can't think of it. You know it, but I can't think of it offhand. But Google or search Joel Grey, early YouTube, and you'll probably find it. He's a little bit embarrassed by it, but you also see the energy of a young Joel Grey and how he mastered that and fine-tuned it into what he did as a performer and what he still had. You realize this boundless energy of a guy who's still 80. He's 80 years old. And still just,
Yeah.
it was it's amazing. Yeah, force of nature.
Was he actually in vaudeville when?
He was. He does this crazy, extremely exuberant physical song. And it goes on for about 5 minutes. I mean, he is working it. As much as the Aggies are doing the Aggie song, he is really working.
Love it.
Yeah.
We're down to just the last minute or two. Does anybody else have any questions before I ask?
This is a quickie. Did your brother go into show business too? Or?
He had been involved a little bit in some community theater and still does a little bit of directing at River Falls Community Theater, where he lives in Wisconsin. A little bit of a hand in it. He used to be a mime for a couple of years. And I think the only time we actually read for something together was The Brothers in Death of a Salesman at a community theater when I was still early in my career. And he did a little bit of acting as well on stage, but minimal, and he went into a business career.
Was there something in your community that supported that, or are you from a big town, or?
Well, I lived in Minneapolis most of my life. And
okay, so it's a little Minnesota.
Minneapolis is a remarkable theater community. If I might give it a little shout out, at one point it was #1 per capita in theater because there was so much going on. Obviously it's a lot smaller than New York, but there was so much going on there theatrically that it was actually #1 in the country for a while. I think it was back in the mid-'80s.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
remarkable. And spawned a lot by the Guthrie.
Mhm.
That was founded out in the middle of nowhere,
Right.
and then spawned all these other theatrical companies, and there was a lot of corporate support as well out there.
That's great.
Wow.
The last question for the night for me, why theater? Why do you do it? Why should other people do it? Why should people watch it? Just why theater?
I do it because I love it, and I think you gotta love it. There's so much that can be crazy and can drag you down if you don't love it. I mean, there's a lot of wacky personalities in theater, and you just kind of have to accept it. Otherwise, it will drive you crazy. It's part of that creative kernel that people approach from any different kinds of perspectives. Whether it's to learn, to be in front of people, to be a star. You never know what the drive is coming from. You know, you have to create. But I've always loved it, and for a long time the stage has just felt like my living room. It feels comfortable up there, and I love digging in to each particular character and finding out about the environment around it. You know, whether it's going back to source material whenever I can with stuff like Les Mis, or even with Little Whorehouse in Texas.
Yeah.
You know, what actually happened, and then building on top of that. But I love the little mysteries around it, and the chance to learn. It's what I love about traveling so much, is it kind of it doesn't force you, but it forces me to learn about the country, to find out about different perspectives, which I love. I love finding different perspectives.
That's great. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And
Oh,
thank you
thanks a
guys
lot.
for coming out. See you next month, or see you on Thursday. Have a good night.